Hey guys, Eric from D&E Garage, and you're on episode 2 of the Build a Barney. And well, when I first got this Jeep, well, let's back up for a second. So if you guys remember not too long ago, Doug and I put a video up of our worst off-road experiences. And our worst off-road experience is when I first got this Jeep stuck. One of the reasons why that was the worst, if you meant here to watch that video, go back and watch it and see the video, I got it high-centered on a log. During the process of trying to get it unstuck, the Jeep started overheating. And overheating to the point where it was bubbling out of my coolant reservoir over here. So, I kind of freaked out at that point because I thought I just broke my Jeep. So I ended up driving it home after I got it unstuck, and it still was overheating. I ran with the heat on, and I was kind of perplexed of why it was happening. So I started troubleshooting the system. What I first did was check my radiator flowing, and it flowed halfway decent. It wasn't great, but for a 20-year-old car, it flowed decent. Then I checked and pulled my thermostat to see if that was stuck. I tested that by boiling it in a pot of water. I think Doug's gone over that before, and to see if it opens and closes properly. And at the end of it all, I couldn't find a problem that didn't result where I kept bubbling in the coolant reservoir. Now, if any of you guys know, when you bubble in the coolant reservoir or start boiling the water, or always see small amounts of bubbles, like little, like almost a fish tank aeration, you see small amounts in the coolant reservoir, that usually means you got a head gasket leak, which is very, very unfortunate. So basically, that's where I ended up going, and I did a bunch of other things even after that, because honestly, I'm going to be honest with you, after I did the head gasket, it continued to overheat. Now, not as bad, but at certain points it would. So basically, I'm just going to run through what I did to replace my head gasket, where the pain points were, and where the good points were, and any suggestions I'm going to give you. So to do a Jeep 4-liter, it's really actually not hard. It's one of the easiest head gaskets I think I've found to do, because number one, you don't need to pull the motor. You can do everything in the engine bay. What you need to do is first pull the air intake off, which usually, I mean, I have the K&N in here. I didn't have the K&N at the time, but it's only about 3 10 to 12 millimeter bolts, and it pops right out with a couple clamps. Then you need to proceed to remove your fuel rail, which is one bolt here, one bolt here, one there, and one there. Those are 10 millimeters, and they come right out, and that's not a problem. Then you wiggle your fuel rail like this, and it pops out. You remove the fuel rail, then you're going to be access to all the manifold bolts. Now I'm going to bring you in a little closer for this. So guys, this is the fuel rail bolts I was talking about 2 seconds ago. And then right here, and down this rail next to the head are all the manifold and the exhaust manifold bolts. You're going to need to remove all of them. They're 14s, and there are a couple trouble ones, and there are some decent ones. Most of them you can get to with a straight socket and just a couple extensions to get you past the intake over here. Some of them you need swivels for, and some you need to be a short. Just use the socket and the ratchet right on it. Most of mine were pretty tight when I got to it, but I just took my time and slowly did it. Used a lot of PB Blaster. This one down here is actually one of the trouble ones, because unless you move the bracket, you can't get to it. This is the power steering bracket. What I ended up using there was actually a ratcheting wrench, and that really saved my life. So if anyone's doing this, I would go get a 14 millimeter ratcheting wrench, and that would really help you. So that was really, this covers this side. I mean, yeah, you take out throttle body linkage and stuff like that, and all these are pretty much 10 millimeters all around. Throttle body's 10s, the bracket to the cabling's all 10s. Like I said, the fuel injectors are all 10s, and all that comes out. You're going to want to unplug this wire, which goes down underneath the intake, and that's your O2 sensor. And then over here is your coolant temperature sensor that goes around to the thermostat housing. Once you remove all that, the wiring can be pulled back up into this corner where the light is right now, or over here, and you can pull the intake out smoothly. The header will just stay there and flop. Now, some suggest that you want to pull the head with the intake on it. My opinion, don't do that. I tried doing that once in the junkyard, and guys, one thing that you gotta realize with this head is that it's very, very heavy. And I can't reiterate that enough. It is a heavy iron head that is close to probably 100 pounds. I may be exaggerating, but I remember when I did it, that was one of the struggle points. It was heavy to move, and to try to include the intake onto this, that's a lot to ask for. So where are we? We have now also with the intake, you're gonna have to take out these 14s. They feed through the intake, and there's one on the bottom back here, if you can kind of see it right there. That feeds in. A lot of people snap those off, and don't forget about that one. And also over here there's 110. As you can see, I didn't put it back for holding my fuel rail back onto the intake. Okay, once you get the intake off, there's one thing you also want to do, which I skipped over, is drain the coolant. But I mean, this is going to be a quick overview, guys. I'm not going to do every detail you need to do. I'm really just going to go into the pain points, like I said. So don't forget to drain the coolant. But after you get the intake off, we're going to go and take the valve cover off, which are all 10s. Down on both sides. Some you need a longer, deep 10 for. And then after that, you're going to be exposing all the head bolts. Now, what I did here is, honestly, some people say you should probably buy new head bolts. I reuse the same ones I had. I mean, if you've taken the motor out, the head off once before, I suggest you do get new ones, just because I think they have maybe one tolerance of redoing it. And after that, they're shot. So I pulled all the head bolts, and what I did was... So what I was saying, it may be hard to tell, but I took a box similar to this and drew out the head with the bolt locations, and then poked holes with a screwdriver and put all the bolts in the box very similar to this. That basically made it very easy for when I went to reassemble. I pulled them out, put them right where they went. So after I drew a similar picture to this, I put all the push rods and the rockers in the same position corresponding to my picture. And I also marked it front and back on the picture, because then I knew when I'm working from the front of the head what goes where. So that basically got me all the way to the point where I'm almost ready to pull the head. So I pulled the head. Like I said before, one of the biggest pains about the head was making sure that I had enough arm strength to lift it up off the motor. Because I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's rather long, and it's rather thick, and it's steel. It's heavy. I will make one note, is that don't forget about one sensor. That a lot of people do forget when they're doing this job. It's all the way in the back. You can see where I have the butt connector on it right there. Let me get my pointer stick. You see where I have the butt connector here? That is another coolant temperature sensor for the head on the back. It goes right to a coolant passage. Don't forget to unplug that. If you break it, it's not that bad. You can go to the junkyard, or you can order a new one online. It's not that expensive. I actually did forget it, and you can see why. Because I had to break that wire when I was pulling it off. So that was a pain, but I managed to do it. Now there's also a grounding strap in the back on the head, but that comes out when you take out the bolts, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. Once you have the head off, you're going to want to clean the block with a razor blade. That wasn't hard. Any hard points I might have gotten with a Scotch pad. I really don't recommend using Scotch pads. You can do a little more damage that way. I just take your time with the razor blade and brake clean. I also took brake clean to the top of my pistons to clean the carbon out, and then that was pretty much it. I was ready to put a new head on. I went to Rock Auto and got a Felpro head gasket, and that wasn't bad. It pretty much was like, I think it was like 70 bucks, and that's all I did. I got a head gasket and a manifold gasket. That's all I needed. So I removed that, and then I sent it off. This is the key thing when you guys do a head gasket job: send the head out to a shop to get pressure tested, cleaned, and make sure there's no cracks in it. Now, I found a shop in Pennsylvania near me that did it for like $175, and that was pretty much it. Once I did put it back on, it was reversing my procedure. I made sure all my valves went in the right, I made sure all my rockers went in the right place as per my picture on my cardboard box. Made sure all my head bolts went in. Now let's talk about the head bolts for a second. So there's my bar here. The head bolts. I showed them to you before. The biggest pain about them, and this is actually the biggest thing that I got to tell you guys about. Doug was here and I was doing it, and the torque for them is 110 pounds. Now you're supposed to bring it to like 45 first, and then gradually bring up the torque on each head so that it seats properly. That's a big thing. Make sure that when you put it on, to seat it properly. Also, the other thing is, some people have used glue on the head gasket. You can do that to keep it in place. I did not. I did not feel like having one little spot of glue anywhere. I placed the head gasket down, and then Doug and I was just get a friend, slowly placed the head down onto the block. Once we got it positioned, we wiggled the bolts, they got all threaded by hand. Then we brought the torque up to 45 foot-pounds on each one, and then gradually stepped up from there. Might even lower. I think maybe we started like 11 foot-pounds and then brought to 45. You really want this to set evenly. If you have any piece of dirt or anything like that on there, you got to make sure both surfaces are clean. That's why I highly recommend sending the head out to a machine shop, getting it decked 1 millimeter off the bottom of it, and then truly cleaning your block. So with that, we go back to the bolts. Torquing the bolts was the scariest thing I've ever done on this Jeep. So the scary part about putting these bolts in was that the max torque you're supposed to spec them to is 110 foot-pounds. Now on a wheel it doesn't feel like a lot, because a wheel, if you break a stud you can replace it. But on a motor, when you're here and you're waiting for that click to hit 110, your heart just stops beating. And that was really the thing that got me when I was doing this, that these bolts just, I mean, they bewildered me. How they just 110, and like you're just waiting for that click. I'll never forget that when I was building this motor. But that was really the biggest, scariest thing, is that you guys got to, you set your torque wrench, get it flat, and trust in 110 will not break the studs. The head bolts. Maybe that's sometimes why I should recommend getting new. You guys might critique me on not getting new ones, but I'm here to tell you that you don't have to. I did this head gasket now, I think Doug would say 3 years ago, and this thing never gave me a problem with at least coolant leaking anywhere else. On that note, if you have coolant and oil mixing together, do not even bother doing the head gasket. Get a new motor. Simple as that. Once the coolant hits the main bearings in the bottom of the block, it wipes them out and destroys the motor. So guys, that's kind of the quick down dirty of doing the head gasket, because once you get the head bolts in, you put your valve cover back on and you reverse everything else and everything goes back on. Funny story is, when I did go send the head out, I never took the spark plugs out. I put the head on with the spark plugs that I originally had in the car, and the car ran that way for about 30,000 miles and it worked no problem. I only replaced them, I think, last year when I put those big wires on, which we'll talk about later. So that was the saga of doing the head gasket on a 4-liter. So any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them below. Hit the like button if you thought this was useful. It's a quick down and dirty how to do head gasket on a 4-liter. Any other questions I'll answer below, and maybe I'll do a follow-up video if I missed something, if you guys see I said I missed something. But I think I hit the highlights of what really takes to do the 4-liter head gasket. And just to let you know what's in the next episode is that my cooling problems hadn't stopped. So at this point I had to replace the thermostat, and I'm going to talk about that in another video later too. But 4-liter thermostats are a pain. But yeah, my cooling problems did not get fixed 100%. It got improved. The bubbling did stop, but I was still overheating. So watch the next episode to find out what happened.